All right, hello everybody. So we are not here today to pardon carbon, but almost more than 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide have been released into the atmosphere since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And today, the parts per million of CO2 have gone from 280 million to around 420 parts per million. And so how do we deal with this massive problem that's causing great climate change? Just on Monday was the hottest day of the ever recorded on Earth in this global surface average temperature, and only until the next day when that record was broken. And we're only into July, and there is a lot more warm weather coming. So let's talk about solutions and how we can deal with this massive problem. So I'll let everyone introduce themselves.
Yeah, happy to go first. Hi everyone, I'm Magnus. I'm founder and CEO of CEEZER. We help large corporations to manage actually negative emission portfolios. This means we help them in transitioning from investing in only avoidance to solely also to removal.
Hello everyone, my name is Carla. My background is actually in science and biology, and I came to the carbon space because I met my co-founder in business, and I'm co-founder of Ucaneo. We remove CO2 from the atmosphere with the power of biology.
Yes, hello everyone, welcome. My name is Nick, I'm one of the co-founders of Inplanet, and we do remove CO2 from the atmosphere in tropical agriculture by using rock powders and deploying a technology called enhanced rock weathering.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with carbon dioxide, let me ask a question. Show of hands, who here knows the difference between, say, carbon dioxide removal and carbon capture and storage? Hands up, anybody who knows the difference? Okay, so it looks like we have a lot of new people to this field. So carbon capture and storage was essentially a process developed by oil and natural gas companies to pretend that they were going to put their emissions underground. It's very much not really happening, and they just pay penalties and continue to emit. So since the special report 1.5 degrees from the IPCC came out in 2018, it really became clear that there was no way to maintain the target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius without billions of tons of carbon dioxide removal, starting in the single-digit billions. A gigaton is 1 billion tons, going to tens of billions of tons per year by 2050. And so essentially we have to create an industry, and borrowing from the Running Tide CEO, to reverse the oil industry's emissions over the last centuries in 50 years, starting from pretty much zero. So let's talk about a couple of the technologies. So you want to talk briefly about minerals and enhanced rock weathering?
Sure,
So we'll talk about a few different technologies, and then we'll go into the founder stories.
So I was lucky to be given this beautiful stone before the panel. Basically, that's what we're working with. It's a silicate rock. And what we're doing in enhanced rock weathering is taking this, grinding it to a fine powder, and then spread it on agricultural fields. Silicate rocks, when they weather, so when they break down under the climate conditions.
Hey, you just removed some carbon there.
Just remove some carbon, exactly. Do remove carbon from the atmosphere. So it's like a catalyst, you can imagine, like a chemical catalyst.
It increases alkalinity and helps counteract ocean acidity by storing CO2 as bicarbonate in the ocean for 1,000 years. So actually, let me just jump in real quick and say, for the criteria for carbon removal, we want it to be durable, meaning it lasts over 1,000 years, hopefully to the millions. We want it to have a low cost, a target of around $100 per ton. It needs to be able to scale to 500 million to 1 billion tons per year, or no VCs or investors will even talk to you. And it needs to be net negative, meaning that it removes more carbon in the process after all the energy used. And then it needs to be additional. It wouldn't have happened on its own, and it has to be verifiable. So do you want to talk about verifiability and direct air capture, and what you all do?
Sure. I mean, so CEEZER is not on the producing side of negative emissions or of carbon removal. What we do is we basically build software and services for large corporations to actually get engaged in the field. And one of the most important factors for corporates to start investing in this, right, is to make sure that they actually understand what they're investing in. So we also look at pretty much the same criteria there. So we would always look at how permanent is the storage? Is it actually storage? What's the risk that it's non-additional, so that this activity would have happened otherwise? And essentially what what helps, I think, to kind of funnel more investment into this, and we can talk a bit about offset later, which kind of relates to this, right? Because a lot of the funds right now move actually into just normal carbon offsets, which are avoidance credits most of the time, is to make sure that you get let's say, a connection between the carbon impact and the climate impact of what you do and the price that you have to pay, because clearly there's a price difference. And I think the best way to do it is indeed science-backed data. Yeah.
Great. Speaking of science, Carla? No.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, happy to jump into science. So maybe on a higher level, right? When you hear climate change, you hear increased temperature, you hear CO2 levels are rising, it's very scary, and you wonder what the future might look like if you have a future, if the planet has a future. And that was kind of my feeling as well, like 4 years ago. But when I looked into the topic and I saw all the CO2 in there, I was like, what can we do with it? Is there like a positive part on all the CO2 we have in the atmosphere? Because when you think about it, where does it come from, right? It comes from all the emissions that power our society currently, that drive our cars and everything. So there's a lot of potential and energy in CO2 that we have. There's a positive side to it. The only question is, how can we turn emissions into a benefit or, to a better future? And that's where carbon removal comes in. So we can, first of all, take the CO2 out that has been emitted in the past 50, 100 years that cannot be reduced in emission. Like, it's already out there. We already have emitted it. So we can get it out. That's great. There is a chance that we can reverse time and take the CO2 that we emitted in the last 50, 100 years with carbon removal technologies. And the second benefit is where direct air capture comes in, which is a subunit, like one specific technology where my company is active in, is that you can take out the CO2 as a first step, but then you provide pure CO2 gas as an output, which enables people or industries to use the CO2 as a new energy source or a new carbon source to produce sustainable plastics, sustainable aviation fuels, anything that currently is made out of gas and oil. So maybe come back to my company quickly, Ucaneo Biotech. We are a direct air capture company. So the system is atmospheric air. The air you breathe comes in the system. We have a fancy machine with a lot of biology in that does magic. And then you have pure CO2 coming out very energy efficiently. And then you can either store it underground to just take it out of the carbon cycle to heal the planet, or provide CO2 feedstock to produce products.
Yes, the CO2 in the air is the same CO2 in your drinks. You can sell it for carbonation, but then it's not necessarily permanently stored. So it's how do you talk in that way about permanence or additionality if you're reusing it in a product that's re-releasing the CO2?
That's a great question. So from a business perspective, those are very different markets. So if you talk about storage, we work with partners that can put it underground and you can sell voluntary carbon credits. But when you go into the product side, it depends on the life cycle of a product. It's similar to a tree. You have a tree that captures CO2, it turns it into wood. But as soon as the tree is used to build a fire or converted, degrades, whatever, the CO2 is emitted again. So when you build biodegradable plastic, and it's degradable, that's great for the carbon cycle, but it's not good for permanence. So you could not really save carbon with it. It's more later stage when you want to have a circular carbon economy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and so Nick, you have rocks. You're putting them in a field. You use basalt or olivine. Which one do you use?
Well, we basically explore silicate minerals,
Okay.
But the main mineral we're working with is
how do
basalt.
you? What's your product? What do you sell then?
So what we in the end sell are carbon removal credits to companies, to platforms like CEEZER. Well, we don't really sell it to CEEZER, but CEEZER would help us to sell them. So basically a ton removed of CO2 from the air, stored permanently, as you mentioned. Luckily, in these rocks, once we have created these bicarbonates, which are a product of the silicate rock reaction, they are stored for a very long time. Like we're talking like 10,000, 100,000, million of years.
Great. And so, Magnus, back to CEEZER. So who's buying carbon removal? What's the market look like?
It's too small to start with, and it's too few companies actually buying it. And I think if you look at the whole picture, right, I think you just mentioned the 500 million to 1 billion tons that will need to be kind of out there. I think if you look at historic purchases that are trackable, we're looking at probably somewhere north of like 3 million that have been, 3 million tons that have been committed. Of those, maybe 3% have been, I think, delivered. So we're very, very early in a potentially very, very large market. The largest buyers would include your normally tech companies, so that would be Microsoft, a lot of the banks, Goldman Sachs, UBS. But what we really have to get to is that every company in the world starts to actually also purchase carbon removal, right? And that so far has been pretty difficult because it's, you know, a very new industry. It's high technological risk, right? So if you invest in this, you don't know what the outcome might be. If you look at large corporations, they're usually not the most, like, let's say, risk-friendly in these kind of things. And so what we actually have to come to is a world where we slowly, or not actually slowly, but actually as quick as possible, transition from using traditional instruments like carbon avoidance credits and offsets to also integrate carbon removal and kind of grow that share year after year towards net zero, right? And that is something that I think data can help with. That is something that also software can help with. We encourage companies to actually look at it really kind of like a stock portfolio in a sense, where you have different technologies than you invested in, and you will adjust that mix year after year towards net zero. And that's exactly what we're doing with our customers.
Great. So I would like to counter a bit on the market size stuff. So there's for those of you familiar with the payment processing company called Stripe in Silicon Valley, they originally started buying novel technologies early in 2020 to help support them to come to the market. And since then, they've put together a squad of, I believe it includes Meta, McKinsey, it's a bunch of different other technology companies, and Microsoft, I think, has their own as well. But essentially, they guaranteed $1 billion in carbon removal purchases over the next 10 years. So they're putting $100 million a year into that. They're getting more companies. Hundreds of thousands of tons are being purchased. Microsoft is trying to offset, go negative back to their founding. There's not enough carbon for them removal that's permanent and meets all those characteristics to buy. So what does that say if you're an entrepreneur out there and you're thinking of going into crypto, or you went into crypto and now you're in AI, looking at AI or something? Carbon removal is really the most exciting, I think, field out there. And maybe we'll touch a bit on some personal stories about what it feels like to work on carbon removal when you see the news of all the terrible stuff out there, but you know that you're working on the solution. Like, how does that make you feel?
I mean, I already mentioned a little bit the story that, like, earlier. I'm happy to touch on that. So yeah, 5 or 4 years ago, I guess I was around COVID. I don't know. I was very angry with the society and how we treat the planet and resources. There's no pricing really for resources, and oil and gas is just for zero. So any new technology that is greener, you compete against zero cost points. But I think it's very important to, when you feel angry, how can you use this energy? And then it's still energy, and how can you use your time to have an impact and have a change? And what I learned, I co-founded the company 1.5 years ago, and it's the best decision I ever made. So I have a chance to use all my technical knowledge, my scientific knowledge, and my drive for impact to actually have real impact, to remove actual CO2 molecules from the atmosphere, right? Before, I was a lot of machine learning and precision medicine, and that's helpful, it has impact, but for the climate, you really have to go into the hardware. And I can share, coming more from a SaaS background, like digital stuff, that it's not, I don't know, maybe, I was surprised it's not the worst to do hardware, biotech, climate tech, all the things everyone says, don't do them, they don't scale, they're annoying. It's really cool, especially also in Berlin. There's space, not always easy to find, but there is space, there is a community.
You're Berlin-based as well.
Yeah, we're Berlin-based.
You're not.
Yeah, I'm actually located in Brazil. Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, and I will say that's something about the carbon removal field is you have to start with an idea and be like, we're going to get to 1 billion tons of removal, which is insane at scale. And so what's kind of neat about this field is every idea, it's not too big. Like, you have to work on hard stuff because we're physically removing molecules. There's a lot of chemistry involved. There's a lot of verification. There's a lot of vetting behind the science. And it's like a whole field that's building before our eyes. I've been involved in the carbon removal field since 2017, and it was nothing. And since the wildfires, the special reports, just every day that it gets worse out there, it's more clear that we need to speed up what we're doing. And even during this recent mini sort of downturn-ish, maybe there's a recession, there was no real recession in the carbon removal field. The people were doubling down, big deals got done, Series A's got done. So if you're an investor, this is a field that every day you will understand more and more why you need to be investing in it. If you're a startup and you're not feeling, or a founder not feeling fulfilled, there's, I think, no better way. And I dropped out of another field because it's so compelling that every one of that whatever you're working on, it will be disrupted by climate change.
Yeah. Just picking up on this, I would really like to reaffirm people who may be interested to go into carbon removal to do it, because we are facing exactly this situation that besides recessions and other fields are not really turning out and not getting investment, not getting interest. Specifically for us and Inplanet, we actually had a situation where we could do so many more projects, accept so many more clients, which we cannot do because of some research issues, some technology development stuff we have to do. But I fully agree with our moderator here that everything is in recession, but carbon removal is in the height. So if you want to go into carbon removal, it's the right time.
Let me actually maybe just on that point, because I think what we've also seen, and I think we manage negative like emission portfolios and credit portfolios for a bunch of larger companies. And I think for me, in the beginning of the year, we really did ask that question, right? Like, will it prevail? Will we see like in a financial recession, will you see corporates move out? Will you see technology companies kind of moving out of that space? And so far, nothing of this has happened. We actually saw still an increase in commitments. We see that budget prevails. We see that the commitments really stand. Not only, and the battery's running out of this laptop apparently. So, and that I think is really exciting, because it's not the most natural thing for a company to invest in at this stage, right? It's usually very far away from your operations. You might not even have any kind of regulation behind it. But we do see that there's really $1 million commitments planned over years and years, and that's not by one company, but really by a lot of companies, adding up to a pretty significant market already, right? And that opens opportunity for people to develop new, like really deep tech technologies, which are direly needed, right? But it also requires us to kind of help companies that are maybe new to this to really kind of get this transition path to move away from basically doing nothing and then maybe, just buying avoidance credits to actually moving towards durable removal.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's pretty wild that in this field, companies are directly involved. Like Shopify is investing in carbon removal because there's such a demand for companies to do serious, validated, verified, and real permanent carbon removal even at high prices today, that companies like the Stripes, like Shopify, have had to go out and fund and write the first purchase order, the first checks for these companies. And I think that says something about how powerful this industry is in terms of being involved in every industry, because every industry today essentially has a carbon footprint, and we need to understand where it can't be mitigated, how to mitigate it. So yeah, anyone want to add on that?
Yeah, just want to add that this also shows that we have a very serious supply problem in the market, because why are these actors doing this? They really want to have access to these very few carbon removal credits that will be there in the next years. So we see all these corporates coming up with these programs like Microsoft, Stripe, Milky Wire, so all these kind of commitments to ensure that they have access to some carbon removal, right? So the market is on the carbon removal side, at least, not talking about avoidance and reduction. We're heavily under catered. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, because we all have, of course, background in carbon removal, and you might have heard carbon removal credits that are actually cheap, or you might have seen it, I don't know, recently saw in a doctor's office that they actually offset their carbon emission. And maybe Magnus can talk a bit more what are different qualities of carbon credits, right? I think you have the best background for that.
Sure, I mean, maybe because I think that's also both here in Europe, but I think particularly in the US, I think there's often kind of a confusion around what's offsetting, what's compensation, what's carbon removal, right? And essentially, I think the way that we will look at it is that compensation kind of includes everything that you do to counteract your emissions as a company. And then in the past and traditionally, what companies have done is they have bought, let's say, the traditional offset credits. So this would be, someone is not deforesting, so that what you call avoidance. So basically you prevent someone else from emitting certain amounts of carbon in the atmosphere, and you can actually calculate that against your own emissions. So the market still runs in that way, but then removal credits now come in, and they've been, nature-based removals have been around for probably also 20 years, which is credits that actually remove. So you have a net reduction, right? So the concentration of CO2 by a very small fraction will be smaller afterwards in the atmosphere. And a big problem currently is that it runs, not a problem, but like the thing is it runs on the same infrastructure. So a lot of companies don't really know what they have in their portfolio. So they buy credits, they wouldn't even be able to tell, am I just avoiding additional emissions, or am I actually investing in something that removes carbon? And to bring in another dimension, we all know all the net zero commitments, right? All the companies want to go to that level where they basically take everything out that they emit, and this will require them to only have removal credits. And it's not like you can tell if you go on, any like larger brokerage. It's not that that's a markup. The credits are essentially the same. So you kind of have to figure out at this point if you're buying or investing into removal or avoidance. And if you think that by probably I think 2025, there's like 315 listed companies in the world that have the net zero year. So they will have to buy full removal for all of their residual emissions. The current pipeline is 0.5% for this of the global market.
Wow. Yeah, and that is surprising, but I think the laws are actually starting to catch up, and because we can now have verified real carbon removal, not some forest that was never going to get cut down, that actually got cut down, and the reserve burned. That's why you can't go get the money back. The project. So we really are trying to. Our industry is working to illuminate these kind of problems, get rid of the problem projects, and there's still some in the past that are coming up and shaming companies, but going forward, I think it's really clear what's going on. And I think even things like the European Union carbon border tax, where if you produce something and have emissions, and even in China, you're going to get taxed on it here. So there will be nowhere to hide from the carbon removal aspects. You're going to have to look at what's called your scope 3. It's your supplier's emissions. You can't say, oh, well, I just bought this steel. I didn't manufacture it. Meanwhile, it's on a coal-fired power plant in South Africa, and it's causing a huge problem, or deforesting somewhere. So, all right. So, we have a minute or so left. You want to add something? Everyone give one add on?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. Maybe picking up with what you said, these border adjustment mechanisms are another big incentivizer for us in Brazil, especially. We actually trying to explore this to think about how can we import, for example, carbon neutral food and soybeans, for example, to the EU. So yeah, they're the politics.
Yeah,
the
the U.S. is
also
the world is eating the cows or the grains that are being grown in the Amazon. So when we eat that food, we're deforesting, right? That's our ecological footprint. So you can think of it in that similar way, that you have to worry about where your things are coming from. Do you want to add anything?
I can only encourage everyone, if you like interdisciplinary teams, and that's what we need, and you like to have impact, join the carbon removal space. It's rewarding and gives hope for the future. And
Magnus, yeah, maybe on Berlin, why Berlin is the next carbon removal, or it's not the next, it's already a carbon removal.
It's already there, Eric. No, I think Berlin is a great place. I think there's really a good mix of both deep tech, of software, of financial players, financial startups. I think it's one of the most exciting spaces in Europe to actually start. So go come and join the scene.
I do think Germany and the Netherlands are the leaders in carbon removal in Europe, for sure. So I'm Silicon Valley. Sorry, we are helping create the market, but there. Yeah, and just to add on that note, this field is there. If you just read literature on the science, there are a lot of problems with scientists putting science into companies. And so a lot of companies in our space are just an entrepreneur emailing a scientist and being like, how can I help? And the answer is usually money and direction on how to get it from the lab to the field. So there's a lot of opportunity here. You can work on something really fulfilling and make a real difference in the world, not just some greenwashing thing. So and we're not parted in carbon, we're coming for it. So hope that's clear.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your presence.
Questions? Oh, yeah, I didn't know it was built in there.
This is the first time I haven't had to semi-passively, aggressively stand there and say for time. So thank you for that great panel. And we have a couple of questions. So the first question is, will the trading of CO2 certificates counteract your efforts, as it is perhaps an easier and cheaper way for companies to neutralize their emissions? There's no name for who it is, so.
I can, because I think I'm the only one really also dealing with the traditional certificates. I will take that question. So 2 things. The first is, only over the past, I think, month, there were kind of 2 bigger studies coming out that actually companies that purchase even traditional credits are actually better on track in their decarbonization. So what we don't see is that you don't decarbonize and buy credits, right? What we do see is that if you decarbonize heavily, you also invest in credits. That said, as I said, the carbon removal technologies can generate credits, and they can be traded in an infrastructure that has been around and that's already used at scale, right? I mean, we look anywhere between like 3 to 7 billion a year, depending on the studies that you look at. So it is already a relatively sizable market, and I think the way that we look at it right now is that it is an important stream of financing for carbon removal players, especially in the beginning, and we can use the credit infrastructure to actually shift, buyers from avoidance credits to removal credits.
Yeah, just quickly commenting on this, but one thing that we see as a carbon removal company and a new company wanting to make carbon removal in a high quality, we feel that it's very, very important for us to make it very clear to the market what are we selling, because we're selling very expensive compared to what you can usually get. So it's a very important task of us to educate people about what they're buying. And let's say the risk is always there that someone says, no, I just want to buy something and just get it done, instead of, oh, I want to commit time and understand what I buy and what is the impact I can create with my credits. So the risk is there, but I think through good education and yeah, talking about it, you can avoid this risk.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions. 1.5? Okay. Okay, so from which countries do you get the most interest or requests for your technology and research? Are there any leading countries?
I'm happy to go. We are a very young company, so only 1.5 years on the market. I think we are the biggest, in science, it's a global community, and also for companies, actually, we get a lot of global large companies reaching out, wanting to buy, use the CO2. There's a lot of inbound, surprisingly, a lot of inbound global players.
Maybe just commenting, so I think the purchase power is traditionally strong from the Northern Hemisphere. So what we sell, our credits, no one will pay this in Brazil, for example. So we have to sell in the US and in Europe. Yeah, this is a tendency that's there, unfortunately.
I will add 2 numbers, 46% of purchases right now EU. On the overall market, we have around 25% from the US overall market. In removal, I think it's a bit different, so US would on average be higher and also growing way more rapidly. While I think that might overtake us, I think by 2025 in terms of purchases. Yeah.
Great, so we'll take 1 more question. Do you also get government support?
I love that question. So we are actually a specific startup case. So we do deep science, but we don't come from university or any spin-off in any way. And especially in Germany or Europe, there is a lot of funding for very early research projects. But this is only for universities. And there's a lot of funding for companies that are a bit later stage and need to grow big plans and need a lot of money, and there's funding. But what do people do that don't come from university and build a startup? And it's a big problem. We're talking to a lot of national funding projects, and they all see this and agree. We need money for startups that do the hard stuff in the beginning, but are not connected to university. And this is what we need in Europe to do progress, to be faster and be not head steering, but be a big player in CDR and new technologies. So we need much more governmental support for high risk projects and startup.
Yeah, and I think some government agencies still have to get their head around carbon and carbon removal, because I always like to tell us we applied 2 times for the Exist scholarship. We were 2 times rejected. Everyone I talk to, everyone who builds whatever app gets the Exist scholarship. And we really put a lot of effort in the application 2 times and just got rejected, I think, because there were the words carbon removal, carbon credit, and Brazil in our application. So yeah, I think there's still a way to improve. But now we're lucky to get from all these great purchases the support we should have already gotten before through some scholarship, I believe.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.